A war hero, a statesman, an Arizona original, John Sidney McCain was born into a Navy family in 1936. His father and grandfather, four-star admirals. After graduating from the Naval Academy as an aviator, McCain went to Vietnam. In 1967, his plane was shot down in a bombing mission over Hanoi.
I ejected and broke my leg and both arms and went into a lake, parachuted into a lake, and I was picked up by some North Vietnamese.
He then spent the next 5.5 years of his life as a prisoner of war in North Vietnam. After being released and retiring from the Navy, McCain was elected as a congressman representing Arizona in 1982. 4 years later, he began what would be the first of 6 terms in the U.S. Senate, earning the nickname Maverick for his independent views and bipartisan legislation. After losing the Republican presidential nomination to George W. Bush in 2000, McCain became the GOP standard-bearer 8 years later, eventually losing in the general election to Barack Obama.
A little while ago, I had the honor of calling Senator Barack Obama to congratulate him, to congratulate him on being elected the next president of the country that we both love.
McCain's later years in the Senate were marked by his strong opposition to President Trump, who as a candidate criticized him for being captured in Vietnam. McCain was harshly critical of Trump's conduct and his campaign's alleged ties to Russia. In an act of symbolic defiance, it was McCain's emphatic thumbs down in the Senate that helped kill an effort by Trump and fellow Republicans to repeal and replace the Affordable Care Act. McCain, who had a history of skin cancer, was diagnosed with a brain tumor in July of 2017. He's survived by his second wife, Cindy, and his 7 children. Phil Latzman, KJZZ News.
Good evening. This is KJZZ special coverage of the death of U.S. Senator John McCain. With Mark Brodie in Phoenix, I'm Steve Goldstein. Arizona senior senator passed away this afternoon after being treated for glioblastoma, a form of brain cancer, for a little more than 1 year. McCain would have turned 82 on Wednesday.
Often called a maverick throughout most of his more than 30 years of serving in the U.S. House and Senate, McCain sought the Republican presidential nomination in 2000 and was the nominee in 2008, ultimately losing to Barack Obama. Over the next hour or so, we'll be hearing parts of some of McCain's more noteworthy comments and speeches. We'll also hear from some of his colleagues and close friends.
Mr. McCain.
Senator John McCain.
John McCain.
We have John McCain saying,
Senator John McCain.
Senator John McCain.
Senator McCain.
Senator John McCain in an interview.
Senator John McCain.
Senator McCain.
I don't want to be controversial, so I won't use his name, okay?
And I agree with the chairman, sir, on the...
Senator John McCain.
From John Sidney McCain, Lieutenant Commander, U.S. Navy.
It was a tumultuous time.
In life in public service, you not only have to be careful about what you do, but you have to be careful about what you appear to do.
Good evening and welcome to the third and last presidential debate of 2008.
The real winner last night was Joe the plumber.
And complete the dang fence.
Rise today to discuss the urgent need for Congress to reform how the Department of Veterans Affairs delivers health care.
No. I want everyone to be respectful, and let's make sure we are, because that's the way politics should be conducted in America. So let's make sure. This was a lone flyer choice. It was risky.
Let's call it a crucial issue. Democrats call it a waste of time. Senator John McCain has been one of the most vocal critics of the administration on this.
Now Republican Senator John McCain has entered the fray, sharply criticizing Trump.
An emotional Senator John McCain last night as he was awarded the prestigious Liberty Medal.
I don't give a damn what the President of the United States wants to do or anybody else wants to do. We will not waterboard.
Senate Republicans trying to repeal and replace Obamacare, and that vote coming up short when the maverick made his mark.
And as part of the special coverage of the death of Senator John McCain, we now turn to a longtime friend of the late senator, also worked for him for many years, Wes Gullett. Wes, sorry for your loss. Good evening.
Hi, Steve.
Wes, you had a very personal connection to Senator McCain, not just from working with him for many years. I wonder if you could talk about what the most important part of that personal relationship was for you.
Oh, well, it was more with Cindy because she brought my oldest daughter to America, so that was pretty cool. But, you know, Deb and I worked for John McCain for a long time, and we spent a lot of time with him. And he is one of them. He is the most remarkable person that I've ever spent time with, and we're going to miss him every day.
Wes, there's a uniqueness to what he brought to the U.S. Senate and his profession, and he was really raw in many ways and almost seemed more human than many other politicians we see. How did you see that in the time you worked with him?
Well, he was unique in that he really didn't care if there were political consequences to things that he thought needed to be done that were the right thing to do for America. And when I say that, when I say America, I mean America. He cared more about the country than politics. He cared more about the country than his personal ambition. He cared more about the country than anybody that I know. So America has lost a patriot today, and that's the sad thing.
Well, I did want to ask you a little bit more about that uniqueness, because it does seem like it wasn't just that the maverick was a word and whether that he still thought that applied to him later in his life or not. I do want to hear more about that, though, in terms of what he brought to the table that other people didn't. You've worked with and for a lot of elected officials over the years. Can you talk a little bit more about what made him special? Like, did he drive the agenda for you? In some cases, we hear about politicians who, I don't want to say are ciphers, but they sort of go at the will of the people who work for them. It almost feels as though what you're saying is that the people who worked for him actually worked for him, that he had more of the direction of where he wanted to go.
Well, there's no question about it. And, we would spend hours trying to get him to do the politically right thing, literally hours and hours, and he wouldn't do it. and if we did win, he would always say that, I know you're wrong. And so it was but it was driven from this sense of sticking up for the little guy, making life more fair, being responsible to the people, and really trying to bring our country to the people and make sure the federal government represented people and took care of them. I mean, you played a clip. One of the clips was about Joe the plumber, and John, he was trying to stick up for the people who didn't have a voice. So he was the voice, and that's what stuck with me. He was the voice for the people who didn't have a voice on so many issues.
Wes, finally, he was known for all the national impact that he had as well. And there are some who want to know where he stands in terms of Arizona's elected officials. Is he up there with Barry Goldwater? Is he up there with Mo Udall, for example? Where would you put Senator McCain in terms of just that historic sense of the impact he's had in terms of Arizona politics?
Well, I think it's apples and oranges to compare him to Barry, because Barry was a pioneer here and his family were pioneers in Arizona. But in terms of the magnitude and impact that he had on the country, I think he and Barry Goldwater stand together. I think if Barry Goldwater were alive today, he and John McCain would be saying the same things that John McCain has been saying over the last year or two. And so I think that John will go down in history as a great leader in our state, right there with Barry Goldwater. Mo was a wonderful person, but I think the impact that John had on the national scene and the international scene. This is a guy that if he were walking down the street in Vienna, Austria, every single person would want to come up and take a selfie with him. This is a guy that, this is a guy that, couldn't go to Russia because he was banned by Putin, because he had that kind of impact in the world, because he was fighting tyranny and standing up for the little guy and being for democracy wherever he went. He's more Churchillian, I think, than anything. So, the world has lost a really remarkable person today, and all of us in that world, and Cindy and Megan and Jimmy and Jack and Andy and Doug and Sydney and Bridget have all lost a dad, and it is a really tough day, and I'm praying for them. I hope that they can get through it, because he meant so much to his family, and we're all praying for. And up in heaven, I'm sure that God is thinking, oh, no, we let the Energizer Bunny in.
Wes Gullett, longtime friend of the late Senator John McCain, also worked for him for a long time. Wes, again, sorry for the loss, and thank you for your time tonight.
You bet, Steve, and thanks a lot.
You're listening to special coverage on KJZZ of the death earlier this afternoon of U.S. Senator John McCain. With Steve Goldstein, I'm Mark Brodie in Phoenix. We turn now to U.S. Senator Jeff Flake, who joins us live on the phone. Senator, thank you for being with us. Sorry you lost a friend and a colleague tonight. We appreciate you being here.
Hey, well, thanks for having me on. Yeah, it's a tough day for everyone.
Senator, I'm curious, first off, you started your first term in the U.S. Senate just a few years ago. I'm wondering what kind of impact Senator McCain had on you when you first came into that body. You had served in the House, obviously, for a little while, but I would imagine moving into the Senate's a somewhat different thing.
It is. I had served 12 years in the House, and one of my first experiences in the House, my first year, I had managed to anger a few people at home because of my opposition to some of the parochial spending that was going on, the earmark spending. And on a flight home one time from Washington, John McCain made his way back to me and pointed his finger at my chest. And I thought, oh, no, I'm going to get it from him, too. But he said, don't back down. He said, you're in the right. They'll come around. And I appreciated that more than you know. And so I've always had a good relationship with him. My first vote in the Senate was a vote that John didn't think I ought to take, and he let me have it. And it was I was in the wrong. I certainly was. I recognize now, but several senators watched as I was berated by the senior senator, and he came back, the next day, put his arm around me, and it was great from then on out. I had received my initiation. But
what was it like? What was it like working with him? I mean, you guys had a special relationship in the sense that you were the two senators from Arizona. What was it like being his Senate colleague?
Well, I was simply known as the other senator from Arizona, which anybody who serves with John McCain is the other senator. I grew to appreciate that. It was like having a big brother that nobody wanted to mess with. And so it was wonderful in that regard. But I quickly learned when I got to the Senate that, I could speak to a group of senators or somebody else could, and there might be chatting in the background or whatever else. But whenever John McCain stood up to speak, everyone listened because they knew what he said meant something. And so I grew to appreciate that, but I grew to appreciate also just his friendship. We traveled a lot of miles around the world, obviously back and forth to D.C. and then around the state to campaign on his, at his reelection and mine. And I loved those times. It was wonderful.
We all know about his affinity for foreign policy issues and veterans issues. I'm wondering from your perspective, as you called it, the other senator from Arizona, are there any particular policy issues, maybe those even specific to Arizona or the Southwest, that he was a particular leader on that maybe there will be a void on now that he's not there?
I'm glad you mentioned that. Everyone recognizes, obviously, his acumen and his expertise, with regard to military policy, security, foreign policy in general. But not as many appreciate what he's done for the state of Arizona. First, with regard to the tribes, certainly understand and appreciate what he's done. He understood very well things like water policy, forest health issues, public use in general, mining, agriculture, everything that is needed when you have a state that's 85% publicly owned, when decisions of the federal government carry an outsized impact. And so he really took those issues to heart and learned about them and traveled extensively around the state. So border issues, immigration issues, these things he understood and appreciated well. And Arizona is better off for it. I can tell you we would have lost a lot more forest than we have over the past 20 years were it not for things like stewardship contracting and things that happened after the Rodeo Chetasky fire. that he and John Kyle took the lead on. So he's been very good for the state of Arizona.
All right, that's Arizona Senator Jeff Flake joining us. Senator Flake, thank you very much for being with us tonight. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
And you're listening to KJZZ special coverage of the death of U.S. Senator John McCain. In Phoenix with Mark Brodie, I'm Steve Goldstein. John McCain ran for president twice during his political career. In 2008, he made it past the primaries to become the Republican Party's presidential nominee, a position that brought him face-to-face with his opponent, who became President Barack Obama, in several public forums. At a town hall, McCain was asked by an audience member if he thought the American public could trust Obama.
I can't trust Obama. I have read about him, and he's an Arab. He is not. No?
No, ma'am. He's a decent family man, citizen that I just happen to have disagreements with on fundamental issues, and that's what this campaign is all about. He's not. Thank you.
When John McCain learned that President Obama had defeated him on Election Day in 2008, he followed tradition. He gave the former president a phone call to congratulate him on the win, but his concession speech went beyond the words that were expected by highlighting the historic nature of Obama's presidency.
First of all, I want to be president of the United States, and obviously I do not want Senator Obama to be. But I have to tell you, he is a decent person and a person that you do not have to be scared as president of the United States. Now, look, if I didn't think I wouldn't be one heck of a lot better president, I wouldn't be running, okay? And that's the point. That's the point.
2017 marked the 50th year anniversary of the Vietnam War. John McCain reflected on the era with C-SPAN in October. He told interviewers that there were a few lessons to be learned from the war, one being that the U.S. should know that they have the strategy and capability to win a conflict before we ever get involved. But he also made some more controversial comments on the draft system and who it called to fight.
It was a tumultuous time, and most of it was bred by the conflict. And one aspect of the conflict, by the way, that I will never, ever countenance is that we drafted the lowest income level of America, and the highest income level found a doctor that would say that they had a bone spur. That is wrong. That is wrong. If we're going to ask every American to serve, every American should serve.
While John McCain's legacy is overwhelmingly positive, he did have his detractors, and he was involved in a major scandal during his time representing Arizona in the U.S. Senate. He and former Democratic colleague Dennis DeConcini were two of five senators, also known as the Keating Five, who were implicated in the failure of the Lincoln Savings and Loan, along with co-founder Charles Keating, at the height of his own political trajectory.
Senator, it's Phil again from NPR.
Yeah, hi, Bill. Yeah.
All right, so if you don't mind, we'll get started. And again, thanks for the time. 3, 2, and 1. Well, sir, I know you and Senator McCain didn't always see eye to eye. You were on different sides of the aisle, and politically speaking and ideologically speaking, in some sense. What are your remembrances of serving with him in the Senate?
Well, first of all, my real sorrow for his family. It's a big loss for all his family, and I knew Cindy, and we had him over to the house for dinner when they first were back there in the Congress, and we were not close, as you mentioned, but I regret that the family has to go through this, and he suffered a lot. Let me first say, before I answer that question, is, I've always had the greatest respect for him for a lot of reasons. Of course, the service he gave to this country in the military. I was in the Army, and I think about, I didn't have to go to war or anything. I think about what would I be up against if I would put there. I just don't have any idea if I could withstand what he did, and he is really a hero for that alone. And he served this country. That was his, they say, his stick. That's what he believed in. Now, we were not close friends because we had some strong disagreements, but we respected each other. We did work together. We both served on the Indian Affairs Committee, and we had over 20 reservations in Arizona, and we worked together on a lot of projects there. So he would make calls to the Republican members on the Appropriation Subcommittee.
Yeah.
Just like Barry Goldwater.
And that
really made a difference.
Yeah, and Senator, I think that illustrates a point of him always being able to work bipartisanly. Even though his style may have rubbed people the wrong way, he was very eager to cross the aisle and work with Democrats, wasn't he?
Yes, he was. He believed that you had to make it work, and our disagreement came primarily over what was known as earmarks at the time, and there were abuses of earmarks, but that was something that brought senators together because you had to work with the other side in order to get what you needed for your state. And of course, there were abuses, and Senator McCain rightfully exposed those and made it a national issue. But I think they may come back. I'm no fan and so critical of our president, but he put out a statement that was very genuine, or it could be interpreted as genuine, and it was what I believe, and I think most Americans believe, a president should do. And he acted like a president instead of the bully that, in my opinion, he's been for so long. And I want to compliment him for that. It may be the first time ever that I will ever say anything positive about President Trump, but he did the right thing. He put out something that is respectful. So,
Senator DeConcini, what does America lose with John McCain today passing?
Well, he was somewhat of an independent voice. He could be partisan, but he was, a strong independent voice. And, the term that maybe hurt him in the election, but maybe not, he was a maverick in the sense that he was willing to step outside from, the party line. And that's important. And I know what it's like when you oppose your president. I opposed Jimmy Carter in the Panama Canal, and I paid a price down at the White House. And John McCain certainly has done that with the present president, and I respect him immensely for having the courage, as I do Senator Flake. It's hard to stand up to the president of your own party. You're just expected not to do that. I don't care what they do. And finally, the tipping finally comes around, like it did with Nixon perhaps, but, you just aren't supposed to do that. And, I have great respect for the man. I think he will be missed on that point. And, of course, his family will miss him immensely.
Senator Dennis DeConcini, former Arizona senator. Sir, thanks so much for your time and your remembrances.
You're welcome. Take care now.
And that was KJZZ's Phil Latzman with former Arizona U.S. Senator Dennis DeConcini. As remember, John McCain, who passed away today at the age of 81. As you can imagine, statements are coming in from across the aisle and all across the country to mark Senator McCain's death. From former Arizona Governor Jan Brewer on Twitter. Today we lost an American hero when Senator John McCain passed away. R.I.P. my friend, a warrior who fought for his country and for his beloved state of Arizona. Our state and nation will deeply miss his courage and convictions. Prayers to Cindy McCain, Megan McCain, Roberta, and the McCain family.
From former President Barack Obama, who, of course, McCain battled in 2008. John McCain and I were members of different generations, came from completely different backgrounds, and competed at the highest level of politics. But we shared, for all our differences, a fidelity to something, the ideals for which generations of Americans and immigrants alike have fought, marched, and sacrificed. We saw our political battles even as a privilege, something noble, an opportunity to serve as stewards of those high ideals at home and to advance them around the world. We saw this country as a place where anything is possible and citizenship as our patriotic obligation to ensure it forever remain that way. Few of us have been tested the way John once was or required to show the kind of courage that he did, but all of us can aspire to the courage to put the greater good above our own. At John's best, he showed us what that means, and for that, we are all in his debt. Michelle and I send our most heartfelt condolences to Cindy and their family.
Also commenting on Twitter this evening, McCain's running mate Sarah Palin in 2008. Today we lost an American original. Senator John McCain was a maverick and a fighter, never afraid to stand for his beliefs. John never took an easy path in life, and through sacrifice and suffering, he inspired others to serve something greater than itself. John McCain was my friend. I will remember the good times. My family and I send prayers for Cindy and the McCain family.
And from Chuck Schumer, McCain's Senate colleague, the Senate Minority Leader from New York. As you go through life, you meet few truly great people. John McCain was one of them. His dedication to his country and the military were unsurpassed. And maybe most of all, he was a truth teller, never afraid to speak truth to power in an era where that has become all too rare. The Senate, the United States, and the world are lesser places without John McCain. Nothing will overcome the loss of Senator McCain. But so that generation remember him, I will be introducing a resolution to rename the Russell Building after him. And I caught up a short time ago with Bob Robb, opinion columnist for the Arizona Republic, and asked him about what he thinks Senator McCain's legacy is in Arizona.
He fit the state very, very well. He, in many ways, it was appropriate that he replaced Barry Goldwater. Barry Goldwater reflected the Arizona of his era with his rugged individualism. John McCain shared Barry Goldwater's independence of spirit, plain-spokenness, but like many of the rest of us, he was an adopted Arizonan. He was far more cosmopolitan in his experience and his interests. And so as Arizona matured, John McCain fit the state extremely well in much the same way that Barry Goldwater fit the state of his era.
Senator McCain was obviously one of those national politicians that, come up every so often, especially in the U.S. Senate. I'm wondering what you think he meant to both the institution of the Senate, but also sort of the national scene, and in some respects, the international scene as well.
He was actually an extremely influential international figure. He traveled extensively. His trips weren't given the same status as a presidential visit or summit, but they weren't mere congressional courtesy calls either. And periodically you would read about a country doing something because John McCain thought they should. And my guess is there was a lot more of that happened than ever became public. John McCain was, except for the President of the United States, probably the most influential international American, particularly during the last couple of decades, and rivaled and occasionally exceeded the international influence of whoever the Secretary of State at the time happened to be.
Yeah, it's interesting because, especially, he sparred, of course, with President Obama on a lot of things, but it seemed like most of it was over foreign policy. The Senator McCain thought that President Obama should have done something he didn't or shouldn't have done something he did. It seemed like he had a real passion for foreign policy sort of in his Senate work.
He was the foremost advocate of an aggressive American foreign and military policy to maximize America's position and influence in the world. And for the last 2 decades, he was the leading advocate of that point of view in the entire country, even pressing the otherwise fairly aggressive George W. Bush administration on occasion to be even more assertive regarding what McCain saw as America's state in virtually every nook and cranny of the world.
Do you think that his time in the military and maybe even his time as a prisoner of war in Vietnam helped shape that view in some way?
It certainly made him an incredibly credible voice in addressing foreign policy and military strategy. He knew it from the inside, and he had experienced the worst that can happen to someone in the assertion of American military prowess. So he spoke with a special credibility. He studied international affairs extensively. He traveled extensively. So he had a depth of knowledge that few other than a president or a secretary of state could match. So I don't think there's any question that his military experience and his prisoner of war experience informed his views about foreign policy and military strategy, and gave him enhanced credibility in advocating what he thought the United States should do in those arenas.
That was Arizona Republic opinion columnist Bob Robb just a short time ago speaking about Arizona Senator John McCain, who passed away earlier this afternoon at the age of 81.
We're reading more statements of people talking about missing Senator McCain and the impact he had on their lives and careers. Michael Crow, president of Arizona State University, said the entire ASU community joins the nation in mourning the loss of Senator McCain. Senator McCain had an extraordinary impact on the university. He represented the best of America. And it's been said many times before, but bears repeating now, that Senator McCain is a true American hero who dedicated his life to serving this great nation, never wavering in his belief in the inherent strength and goodness of America and its promise. Also, President Crow says, I was fortunate to have met Senator McCain more than 2 decades ago while working at Columbia University, and from there our friendship and working relationship grew. Among our common interests, Senator McCain and I shared great admiration for Teddy Roosevelt, and especially TR's memorable speech from 1910 about being, quote, in the arena.
We also heard from Paul Ryan via Twitter this evening, quote, John McCain was a giant of our time, not just for the things he achieved, but for who he was and what he fought for all his life. He will always be listed among freedom's most gallant and faithful servants. And from Lindsey Graham, McCain's friend and colleague in the U.S. Senate from South Carolina, also on Twitter, America and freedom have lost one of her greatest champions, and I've lost one of my dearest friends and mentor.
This is KJZZ special coverage of the death of U.S. Senator John McCain. Senator McCain passed away earlier today at the age of 81. With Mark Brodie in Phoenix, I'm Steve Goldstein. And now we turn to former Arizona Corporation Commission Chair Chris Mays, who, some of you who may be new to Arizona don't know, she was also a reporter for the Arizona Republic and had many experiences with Senator McCain, both as a member of the media and as an elected official. Chris, thanks very much for joining us on this tough evening.
You bet. Hi, guys. How are you?
Okay, thanks again for being with us. So I need you to tell this story about getting kicked off the Straight Talk Express. Chris Mays kicked by Senator McCain, who enjoyed the media most often, right? Can you give us a little bit of background on that?
Yeah, just not the media I was a part of.
Okay.
I have to tell you guys, I got to know Senator McCain during that time when I was a reporter covering his first presidential campaign. And then I got to know him later on more when I was a corporation commissioner. And I later told him, I said, Senator, truth is, you may have kicked me off your bus, but you gave me the best year of my life. It was really true. It was so much fun to cover his first presidential campaign and to cover it actually outside the media bubble, from outside the Straight Talk Express. And how all that happened was, he, like a lot of presidential candidates, had a, somewhat tumultuous, turbulent relationship with the hometown newspaper. And for him, that was the Arizona Republic, and the Republic had covered him like any other, elected official, and had, written, fair but tough stories, sometimes very tough. And so, I just happened to be the cub reporter, the young reporter that the paper sent out to cover his presidential campaign in 1999 and 2000, and they banned me from the Straight Talk Express. So it was kind of interesting. I rented a car and I followed the Straight Talk Express all over, New Hampshire and Iowa and South Carolina and California and Michigan. But it was. And that was fine.
Did you ever get back on the bus, though, Chris? Did you ever get back on?
I think they did let me on the bus once. One time I got on because I have a picture of myself on the bus. So I did get on, but I will say that was such a magical campaign. And and there was a reason that the country fell in love with him during that campaign, and why he caught on fire in New Hampshire and darn near won South Carolina. Many people believe if it hadn't been for some dirty tricks that happened in South Carolina, he would have been president. I personally think that it would have been marvelous if he had become president either in 2000 or 2008. The country needed him then, and God knows we need him even more now. So I consider it one of the great honors of my life, whether I was thrown off the Straight Talk Express or not, to have covered his campaign, to have been a reporter covering that campaign. And then, and I haven't told this story much at all, but 3 years later, as you guys know, I was appointed to the Arizona Corporation Commission, and I actually had a tough race of my own when I had to run in my own right in 2004. And the Republican Party didn't like me very much at that time. Maybe they never did, but they were trying to run somebody against me, and they were trying to get Senator McCain to endorse my opponent and to oppose me. And so I actually went to see him, and I needed to ask him to not endorse my opponent. I didn't have the nerve to ask him to endorse me, but I just wanted him to sort of not endorse the other guy. And he wanted to talk about the Republic. He wanted to talk about our coverage of him for a little bit, and then we turned to my request of him, and he looked at me and he said, "Chris, that's what I'm going to do. I'm not going to endorse your opponent." And I've always thought that it was that support of me that he was willing to give that allowed me to be elected and to be a corporation commissioner for the next 7 years. So, I think I attribute any legacy that I have to that act of a small act of courage on his part, and basically saying, I'm going to do what I think is right, and I'm not going to do what my party thinks I ought to do, and I'm going to help this person who covered my campaign 4 years earlier.
Chris, how would you describe working with Senator McCain? Obviously, when you were on the Corporation Commission, there's sort of a narrow scope of issues that you were dealing with. But I would imagine, as you said, there were times when you worked with the congressional delegation and Arizona senators. What was it like working with him on some of those specific issues?
Yeah, that's true, Mark. And I don't want to oversell how much the Senate was involved in the issues that the commission regulated. But I will tell you this: Senator McCain was a fierce advocate for the Navajo Nation, for instance, and I can remember working on some issues where we were dealing with some electricity issues up there, and I think that he was involved in advocating at the same time for the Navajo Nation, electricity supply issues to the Navajo Nation. I always believed that he was an advocate of clean energy, which I was as well, and I hope that he watched what we did and was proud of the fact that Arizona adopted a renewable energy standard. I believe that was something he believed in as well. And I think in general, he was a believer in making sure that Arizona had a strong economy and that people could afford electricity. So I think he supported what we were doing and certainly was involved in those issues at the federal level.
Chris, finally, before you go, you mentioned how for a time maybe the Republican Party didn't like you so much, and that may have been in part because you had worked very prominently for Democratic Governor Janet Napolitano. But I wanted to ask you, I think it's important that one of the things that is said of Senator McCain, even if he often was very loyal to the Republican Party, of course, that was in his blood for many, many decades, he was someone who did cross the aisle. And having worked for a Democratic governor as you did, even with your Republican background and as a Republican elected official, how big a statement do you think it made that Senator McCain was someone who did cross the aisle often and was willing to work with Democrats?
Oh, I think it's absolutely a huge part of his legacy, and I think that's one of the reasons that so many Americans are so sad tonight, including me, which is that it just feels as though we have lost so much in his passing, that he was one of the last prominent elected officials in America who was willing to work across the aisle, who took pride in it, who had the courage to do it. Although he'd probably say, you know what, this doesn't take that much courage. This is just doing the right thing. And so I think that is an enormous part of his legacy. I feel as though that's what he was doing when he supported me, even though people told him not to. And I know that he was just about doing the right thing and about serving the United States of America and the state of Arizona. Arizona has lost our greatest leader, and that's just terribly sad.
All right, that's former Arizona Corporation Commission Chair Chris Mays. Chris, thank you for being with us tonight. We appreciate it.
Thanks, Chris.
Thanks, guys. Thanks for having me on.
You're listening to KJZZ special coverage on the death of Senator John McCain. He died earlier this afternoon at the age of 81. With Mark Brodie in Phoenix, I'm Steve Goldstein. Recently, I caught up with Dan Nowicki, longtime national political reporter for the Arizona Republic. As Chris Mays talked about covering Senator McCain in his first presidential campaign, I asked Nowicki what it was like to start covering McCain's presidential campaign in 2007.
In January of 2007, I got the McCain campaign beat, which resulted in me, covering him for about 2 years solidly. Basically was devoted to covering his campaign for president. He formally announced that campaign in April of 2007. So rode around with him in the bus on the campaign plane from primary state to caucus state to primary state. And it's just over time, the Republic's relationship with McCain was not always pleasant, but we were able to just kind of start from scratch. And I think day in, day out, McCain and his aides, followed the sustained coverage. And at some point, I guess came to the conclusion that, the coverage was fair and balanced.
Were you intimidated at all initially to cover him because there was a presidential campaign? Whether you were from some publication he didn't love or not, was he amenable to having a good conversation with you?
I didn't pull any punches, and we just said, we're going to report the good, we're going to report the bad, we'll report the ugly, and it wasn't always pleasant. I remember specifically one line of questioning that always kind of, I think, irritated McCain was the fact that he was missing so many votes in the Senate. Those 2 years while I was running for president, he had one of the worst records in the Senate. I think even Tim Johnson, who had suffered a stroke, had a better voting record in those 2 years than McCain did. And there were other senators who were running in that cycle, so it wasn't, can't totally blame it on just running for president. McCain was very touchy about that, how that might play in Arizona, in the Arizona Republic. People over the years have asked me, did McCain ever yell at me? He kind of had that reputation. He never did yell at me, but I would get the silent treatment from him from time to time. And, he'd look right through you at a press conference if you're asking a question that he didn't want to answer.
Did you have a feeling that he actually liked talking to the press, that he was someone who really liked, there was the Straight Talk Express, of course, before that. Did it feel like he enjoyed the exchange with media members?
No, I think so. And during even the 07, 08, campaigning, he definitely seemed to enjoy talking to reporters. He'd sit in the back of the bus, so much so that sometimes we'd say, stop talking. We have stories to write. And there's always an obligation if McCain was back there talking, he might say something newsworthy. You didn't want to miss it, so you had to kind of crowd around him and listen. And that basically through the primaries, that's what he did.
So Dan, what's it been like covering such a complex politician like this for so many years, who's been ultra powerful nationally and locally, and has had an interesting personality and has been willing to talk about a lot of different things? That's almost like a godsend for a reporter, isn't it?
Over the years, we really did kind of develop a good relationship, and I think he came to trust me as a reporter who, would report fairly on him, on his campaigns. Obviously I was up against, the New York Times and everybody else, and I think there always was kind of the glamour and the lure of the national media. Mm-hmm. But I think he saw that the Arizona Republic served an important, purpose for its readers and also for him. He wanted to make sure, his message was fairly conveyed to the voters, and I think we did that. We like I said, we reported pros and the cons of McCain, and sometimes he didn't like us, sometimes he really didn't like it, and sometimes I think he thought we did a good job.
Dan Nowicki, national political reporter for the Arizona Republic. Dan, thanks.
Thanks, Steve.
I spoke with Dan Nowicki several months ago about Senator John McCain. Thanks for listening to KJZZ special coverage on the passing this afternoon of Senator McCain.
In May, HBO aired a documentary about Senator McCain called John McCain, For Whom the Bell Tolls. The title is a reference to one of McCain's favorite novels. Around the time it came out, I spoke with one of the producers and directors, Peter Kuhnhart, and asked him about how he decided to do the documentary.
Well, when it was reported that John McCain had brain cancer, my son Teddy proposed instantly that we do the film. We had done a similar film on Teddy Kennedy right after it was announced that he was diagnosed with the same brain cancer. And we kind of rushed that film through to complete it in Teddy's lifetime. And we had the same feeling about John McCain. We wanted to jump right on it and get it done while John was still around and could see it and be part of it. So we proposed it to HBO. HBO gave us an instant green light, and within 3 weeks of his announcing he had brain cancer, we were sitting with him in Sedona and having great conversations with him.
Did it take a lot of convincing on your part to get Senator McCain to agree to do this?
No, I think the fact that we had done his great friend Ted Kennedy as the other lion of the Senate convinced him that this was something he should and wanted to do. So very little convincing. In fact, John was the one who pushed us to do it quickly before his health grew worse. So he really pushed us right along.
Based on the work that you did on Teddy Kennedy, what similarities and differences have you noticed about maybe how the two of them reacted to their diagnosis or have tried to live their lives with the diagnosis?
I think they reacted in very similar ways, which was, I'm going to push forward. I'm not going to look back. I've had a great and exciting and fulfilling life, and I'm going to live it as long as I can. I think it was a little easier for Teddy Kennedy to continue work because he lived so close. It's harder for John McCain out in Arizona.
When you talk to people who have worked with John McCain, you kind of get the sense that he's not loving the fact that he is in Arizona and not in the Senate. And as you say, he's still, doing work while he's here, but it's not the same as being sort of in the room in the Senate. Did he talk about that at all, about maybe some frustration about having to do his work from here and not being able to be maybe as fully engaged as he would like to be?
Well, when we spoke with him, we had two lengthy sessions with him, one in Arizona, one in D.C. And the first was in August of last year, and the second was in September, October of last year. We haven't seen John since then, except for the fact that my son, Teddy, took the finished film out to him 2 weeks ago and showed it to him. So when we were seeing John McCain, he was still active in Washington. He was still going back and forth. He was trying to figure out his medical treatments at the same time as figuring out how he was going to continue to work. I do know that he's stayed very engaged and plugged in with what's going on, and has offered his comments as news broke on the East Coast.
What was it like for your son to watch the movie with him?
He said it was extremely emotional. It was right after John had intestinal surgery in Phoenix, and Teddy waited a couple of hours in the hospital lobby, and John woke up and was ready to see him, and he screened it and was quite silent during most of it. And at the very end, he smiled and he reached over and he held Teddy's hand and he said, "Thank you very much. You nailed it." So, Teddy kind of welled up, feeling tears in his eyes, but he said it was a surreal experience to be sitting there with John McCain, watching John McCain watch his story. Very emotional.
Now, the documentary doesn't really gloss over some of the controversial or less than shiny moments in Senator McCain's life. What was it like talking to him about some of those things, and what was it like maybe for your son watching? It seems like it might have been a little bit uncomfortable, some of that stuff, to be sitting next to John McCain watching some less than ideal moments of his life.
You would think it would be, but it was John McCain who said to us, "I want to do this warts and all. I've learned more from my mistakes and from my missteps than I have from the things I've done right. So from day one, he encouraged us to explore those mistakes that he's learned from. So there was no tiptoeing around all the different political moments where he made a decision that he later regretted and then apologized for it and tried to do right by it. So that's a very refreshing type of politician. We were very struck by that, and I think part of his heroism is his honesty and his willingness to say, I've made a mistake and I want to correct it.
Given the amount of time you have spent with John McCain and the research that you have done into his life, when all is said and done, what do you make of his legacy, both in the U.S. Senate and maybe sort of in the broader sense?
You know, one of the things that I walked away from this experience was just liking John McCain. He's a very decent, normal, down-to-earth, head-on-his-shoulders guy. He's the kind of guy you like to spend time with. And I think when we went out and interviewed his political allies and opponents, so we interviewed George Bush, who ran against him in the presidential campaign, and President Obama. And McCain took no negative baggage away from those experiences. They were harshly fought fights, and yet he's remained friends with these people and many Democrats and many Republicans. So I think the concept that he can separate his political beliefs from his friendships and he can move on from a negative experience to a positive experience was what made him so successful in the Senate. Here he's got this reputation as being tough and on his own and independent, but the fact is he's had many collaborations with people across the aisle that have led to successful legislation. And I think his final message for America is we've got to get back to working together and stop name-calling and going against each other just for the sake of fighting. He's calling out for normal order again.
That was Peter Kuhnhart, one of the producers and directors of the HBO documentary John McCain, For Whom the Bell Tolls. We spoke in May, right around the time the movie came out.
Good evening. This is KJZZ special coverage of the death earlier today of U.S. Senator John McCain at the age of 81. With Mark Brodie in Phoenix, I'm Steve Goldstein. Now we're joined for a few minutes on the phone by Lorna Romero, who is communications director for the 2016 McCain Senate re-election campaign. Lorna, thanks very much. Sorry for your loss tonight. Thanks for being with us.
Thanks for having me, guys. Appreciate it.
Well, being with Senator McCain for the 2016 campaign, I almost want to leave it open-ended. What was it like to be that close to someone who was running for re-election and was this incredibly national figure known by almost everyone, 2008 GOP presidential nominee? What was it like to work with him, learn from him?
It was an incredible experience. When I got that call and made the decision to join the campaign in 2016, I knew I was going to be in for a ride, but I had no idea what exactly that ride was going to entail. You know, I had always admired Senator McCain from afar, and especially, me being a younger person in the political world, he was really somebody that I looked up to. I mean, the first election I was able to cast the ballot in was in 2008 when he was running for president. So it was a complete honor for me to be able to work for him. And then to be able to see from the inside how somebody of his stature operates, especially in a campaign, is incredible. I mean, he loves campaigning and he loves retail politics. And it was very clear how much he loved the state of Arizona and traveling from corner to corner. And it was difficult for me to keep up. I mean, I was, I was much younger than him, and we would be working 12 to 14-hour days, traveling the entire state. And he would say, Lorna, you have to keep up. And I'm like, I'm sorry, I'm just not used to this kind of schedule. But it was just incredible to see his energy and passion and how much he loved representing the state of Arizona. And that's just something that I will always keep with me is the fact that he was just so passionate about the work that he did.
I want to come back to that energy point, which is an interesting one, because people have said that before. Even when he would go through a tough campaign, people would talk about, well, is he ready for another one? And he would often say that the battle was one of the things he loved so much about it. He would at least say publicly that he wanted to have a contender that he could go against and really battle to make it really worth the effort that the American people would want to see. Did you see that on a daily basis?
Oh, definitely. And, early on when we launched the campaign, a lot of the national rhetoric was, is this going to be the year that John McCain loses? There was a lot of that happening. And, from the inside, we didn't pay any attention to that, but I feel like that energized him more. When people doubted him, when it was a contentious battle, it really did energize him to fight even harder. He would always say publicly and personally in conversations that he never took anything for granted. And that was very evident in his work style, especially on the campaign trail. A lot of people would assume somebody with his name ID and stature and serving the state for as long as he had, that they would just, kind of sit back and just let, the election take its course. But no, he fought every single day to maintain the position that he had because he loved the work that he did for Arizona. And so, yes, he would always say, that he appreciated a hard-fought battle, and he embodied that every single day on the campaign.
Lorna, what do you think it was about the retail politics, about the sort of day-to-day grind of campaigning that he so enjoyed?
I really think it's interacting with people. He loved talking one-on-one with the people of Arizona, or even people outside of Arizona when he would travel abroad and nationally. Sometimes it was difficult for us to stay on time with our schedule because if someone approached him wanting a photo or to chat with them, he would talk to them. And he really enjoyed hearing their stories and hearing the things that were happening to them in the state. And I think it really is a virtue of a earlier time in politics where it was pre-social media and pre all of these technological advances we have these days for communicating, and it really was this face-to-face interaction that people relied on in order to get support. And even with advances in modern technology, he still went back to that basic where I'm going to be able to make an impact and resonate with the people of Arizona on that one-on-one basis, and that never stopped.
Lorna, how would you compare, since you were up close on his campaign, how would you compare the way that he ran his campaign and his involvement in his own campaign relative to other elected officials?
He is extremely hands-on, and especially since he's been doing this for so long and has run in a number of different campaigns, he would always want to know, what was happening next, who he was meeting with, what the schedule was like, and he would oftentimes come up with his own ideas of where we needed to travel in the state, who we needed to visit with, et cetera. And so nothing went by without his approval, period, whether it was creating an event or meeting with elected officials or a statement. John McCain was involved with every aspect of his campaign because it meant so much to him.
Lorna Romero was communications director for the 2016 McCain Senate re-election campaign. Lorna, again, thanks very much for your time tonight.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
You're listening to KJZZ special coverage on the death of Senator John McCain. Senator McCain died earlier today at the age of 81. Comments are coming in, remembrances, condolences are pouring in from Twitter, also statements from politicians, people who are friends and colleagues of Senator McCain. For one, former President George W. Bush called Senator John McCain a man of deep conviction and a patriot of the highest order. In a statement, former President Bush said that McCain was a public servant in the finest traditions of our country and calls him a friend whom I'll deeply miss.
We heard from former President Bill Clinton on Twitter, who said John McCain believed that every citizen has a responsibility to make something of the freedoms given by our Constitution. And from his heroic service in the Navy to his 35 years in Congress, he lived by his creed every day. We also heard from former First Lady Hillary Clinton, of course, a colleague of Senator McCain in the U.S. Senate, who said Senator John McCain lived a life of service to his country, from his heroism in the Navy to 35 years in Congress. He was a tough politician, a trusted colleague, and there will simply never be another like him. My thoughts and prayers are with Cindy and his entire family.
Also, Vice President Mike Pence on Twitter said that Karen and I send our deepest condolences to Cindy and the entire McCain family. We honor Senator McCain's lifetime of service to this nation, in our military, and in his public life. We've been hearing from people who covered Senator McCain as media members, also those who were his colleagues and former employees as well. One of the people I spoke with recently was Arizona Republic editorial opinion page editor Phil Boas, who talked about seeing Senator McCain recently when McCain came to visit the editorial board.
McCain came into the office, and what really struck me right away was how serene he was. I mean, he was like he'd always been, coming in to the newspaper, kind of making jokes and laughing. And making fun of us in some way or the other, but he was himself. And you looked at him and you wondered, how are you able to maintain that? But when you look back on McCain's life, you realize this is a guy living on house money. I mean, we all know the story of the Hanoi Hilton. But if you go back to another part of his story, the incident that occurred on the USS Forrestal, the aircraft carrier that McCain was a pilot on, and the fire that they had there, you can go on YouTube, and I would recommend anybody go in, just type in USS Forrestal in YouTube and look at the footage of this incident. 134 sailors died in this, and McCain nearly lost his life. He was so fortunate. He was right in the middle of it. What happened was there was an electric impulse that set off a missile on one of the aircraft, and it hit one of the other airplanes right next to McCain. McCain was in the cockpit. His plane was set on fire, and he had to climb out while the plane was on fire. And he used this mechanism that was part of the refueling to climb out of the plane and get away from the flames. And as he's running away, there's an explosion that throws him and injures him. And there's a fire crew that was trained to put out these fires, and they go in and bombs are going off, machine gun fire going off. About a third of the deck was on fire. And with all these explosions going off, this team of firefighters was basically vaporized. I mean, they were killed. So they had to bring in another team that was untrained, and they were spraying foam and water, and the two were canceling each other out. So the fire was getting bigger. And there was real fear it was going to engulf the entire ship. And so McCain was very lucky to survive that. And that's a footnote in his story. Hardly any of us remember that.
And that was Arizona Republic editorial page editor Phil Boas earlier this year talking about Senator John McCain. This is KJZZ special coverage on the death of Senator McCain earlier today at the age of 81.
When McCain conceded the 2008 presidential race to Barack Obama, his speech went beyond the expected elements. While he thanked his supporters, he also spent a significant amount of time talking about the historic nature of Obama's presidency and highlighting what he called the special pride the African-American community was feeling on election night.
Senator Obama has achieved a great thing for himself and for his country. I applaud him for it and offer him my sincere sympathy that his beloved grandmother did not live to see this day. Though our faith assures us she is at rest in the presence of her Creator, and so very proud of the good man she helped raise. Senator Obama and I have had and argued our differences, and he has prevailed. No doubt many of those differences remain. These are difficult times for our country. And I pledge to him tonight to do all in my power to help him lead us through the many challenges we face.
More recently, after President Donald Trump tweeted that it was, quote, time to move forward in working constructively with Russia, end quote, McCain fired back with a strong statement on CBS's Face the Nation. He took issue with the Russian government's suspected meddling in the 2016 election.
If you were Vladimir Putin, who I've gotten to know over the years, you're sitting there and you got away with literally trying to change the outcome, not just of our election, French election, tried to overthrow the government of Montenegro, a beautiful little country, I recommend it. And there's been no penalty whatsoever.
And that was Senator John McCain talking about his relationship with Russia, which was certainly bumpy over the years. KJZZ special coverage of the death of Senator McCain continues in Phoenix with Mark Brodie. I'm Steve Goldstein. Former Congressman Matt Salmon was a state senator when John McCain first ran for the U.S. Senate. Salmon says McCain's support had a major impact on his own political trajectory.
He was a force to be reckoned with in so many ways. He was, somebody that I trusted and believed in, and always knew would do the right thing by America. And I'm going to miss him.
That's former Congressman Matt Salmon.
And KJZZ's Phil Latzman recently had the chance to speak with former Arizona Senator Jon Kyl, who, of course, served with McCain in the U.S. Senate.
What's he like as a colleague?
Well, how much time do we have?
Go on.
Well, I will a little bit. My entire 26-year career in the Congress, I served with Senator McCain. The last 18 years, we were seatmates. We were the two senators from the state. And it was a very interesting relationship because he is a really an interesting person. I don't think, for example, that I ever met anybody with, at least in elective office, with better instincts for national security policy. He's just very good, and one of the reasons is because he's probably more traveled than any other member of Congress, at least to places that matter. And by the way, these are not your wonderful vacation spots. I'm talking Yemen and Afghanistan and Iraq and places like that unfortunately there's conflict, but it's not very nice to go to. So he's conducted so many different trips abroad. He knows the leaders. He knows those issues. Well, it was great to serve with somebody like that and to learn about those things with him. By the way, he's been a great mentor of a lot of young members of Congress, Democrats and Republicans alike, and on all of these CODELs, congressional delegation trips, CODEL for short, he was the leader, and he would invite anybody that would come along. So that's one thing. He, as we all know, was a person quick to make decisions, the fighter pilot, and we used to kid him, ready, shoot, aim, but sometimes you need people with leadership skills that are really get in there and make decisions and get on with it rather than just dither. I think he and I were a good combination, and I think he would acknowledge this because I'm this very conservative, careful lawyer that always wants to dot the I's and cross the T's. And so I think we were a pretty good complement to each other, and we tended to primarily divide issues. If he was big on one, then I would try to seek a different issue to work on so we could cover more ground that way. Especially later in our career, we did everything that related to Arizona. We tried to do it together. Our staffs worked together so that there was no division there. That can be a problem in delegations, particularly where you're both of the same party. You're all trying to create or get credit for the same thing. We didn't do that, at least in the latter half of our time together. And suffice to say, because of his personality and kind of being bigger than life in many ways, it was an interesting time to serve right along beside him in the Senate.
Can you maybe tell us a little story about John McCain that may not be widely publicized? Something funny, something that you know.
I'll tell you a story that kind of illustrates the kind of person he is. He and I were trying very hard to, and he was the one getting most of the publicity on this, to get a direct flight from Washington Reagan Airport to Phoenix back when we represented the hometown airline here, and that would have been much more convenient for people flying back and forth to the Capitol. Well, after a while, his critics began to say, well, you're just trying to do this so you can get your Of course, John came home every weekend. He started that. And so both of us did, and we had to fly through Chicago and Dallas. And so he was criticized, you're just trying to get this so it'll be easier for you. Well, that got under his skin. And as you know, when something gets under his skin, he's going to pop back. And so one day he just popped off and said, oh, no, you're totally wrong. He said, I'll never take that flight. Well, we got the flight. And he says to me, that is the second stupidest thing I ever did in my life. And, of course, anybody that knows John knows that he loves to make fun about how he somehow or other was able to place his aircraft directly in the path of a missile in North Vietnam, and as a result served 5.5 years in prison there. And he's got a bit of a dark sense of humor, but he's also very self-effacing. He kept that promise, by the way, for many, many years. I'd be coming directly home on the flight, and he'd be headed off to Chicago or Dallas. Eventually, after I don't know how many years, he finally said, John, you think I've done that long enough? I said, yes, John, let's fly together. So we did after that.
If one word comes to mind when you think of John McCain, I think it is fighter. Yeah. I mean, he just...
I'll tell you one of the... I used to kid him about this, and it's mostly not true, but there's a little truth to it. The old... guy in the Western movie that throws open the barroom doors and kind of is looking for a fight. Well, John would come in the Senate doors kind of the same way, and he'd see whether there was a big debate going on. And if there was, he'd listen for a minute, and then he'd join in. If there wasn't, I used to kid him, he'd start one. And so he did love the fight. And I'll tell you, his biggest... I think today still is heroes, Teddy Roosevelt, who had the same attitude. If you're not in the dusty arena fighting, you're going to win some, you're going to lose some, but you don't live life fully if you're not really fighting and making every minute count. And in John's case, he's tried to make every minute of his life count.
So as succinctly as you can and think you can, what do you think his legacy is going to be for both for the state of Arizona and for the nation? He's just that larger-than-life figure.
There are so many things that I know he did for the state of Arizona and for the country. They will all be recorded in time, and I also don't know which would be most important to him. I think, based on what he says, it's fighting the good fight and making a difference. And, I mean, what more can you ask to, when you ask to serve the people of the state and to serve the country, than to say you gave it your all and that you achieved a lot during the time that you were there. I mean, to me, that is the legacy. Now, you can fill in all the blanks with the examples of things that were accomplished or not accomplished, but to me, that's what you want to be remembered for when you are asking the people for their support for your public service.
That was former Arizona U.S. Senator Jon Kyl speaking with KJZZ's Phil Latzman. Former Arizona Attorney General Grant Woods was John McCain's congressional chief of staff. He says he remembers McCain as a person who wasn't bothered by the cheap shots from political rivals.
I happened to talk to him within 15 minutes of when candidate Trump had said he liked heroes who weren't shot down or captured. And I can tell you, it really did not bother him personally. But it did bother him a lot that he would demean his fellow prisoners of war or anyone who had ever been a prisoner of war. Because, frankly, John McCain can take it. People have called him every name in the books. But the rest of those guys, to have a presidential candidate, now the President of the United States, demean them, that's upset John.
Senator McCain has sometimes been known for having a short temper over his years in Congress, but Woods, his first chief of staff, says he never saw it that way.
I certainly heard about that, but I think that kind of mellowed some over the years. However, the idea that he has no patience for people who either don't know what they're talking about or ask stupid questions or are unprepared, that hasn't changed. That's been true from day one.
McCain, of course, earned the nickname Maverick over his more than 30 years in Congress, and Grant Woods says the name is a good fit because it reflected his fiercely independent spirit.
I've known him all of my adult life, basically, and he hasn't changed a bit. If you tell him to march left, his instinct is to march right. Like, why? If you say, don't ask why, he won't do it. It's amazing he was as successful as he was in the military.
Former Arizona Attorney General Grant Woods. It's special coverage on KJZZ on the passing this afternoon of U.S. Senator John McCain. With Steve Goldstein, I'm Mark Brodie. We heard from Meghan McCain, Senator McCain's daughter, who says in a statement, quote, "I was with my father at his end as he was with me at my beginning. In the 33 years we shared together, he raised me, taught me, corrected me, comforted me, encouraged me, and supported me in all things. He loved me and I loved him. He taught me how to live. His love and care, ever present, always unfailing, took me from a girl to a woman."
We close our special coverage with this. Nearly 60 years after graduating from the Naval Academy, Senator McCain came back to address graduates. The senator told the audience to beware of parties that preach nativism rather than equal justice. He was criticized by some for his words because it was seen as a critique of the GOP and President Donald Trump. We close our coverage with this particular speech, a clip of this speech from Senator McCain. For Mark Brodie, I'm Steve Goldstein.
I believe in Americans. We're capable of better. I've seen it. We're hopeful, compassionate people. And we still have leaders who will uphold the values that made America great and a beacon to the oppressed. But I don't take that for granted. We have to fight. We have to fight against propaganda and crackpot conspiracy theories. We have to fight isolationism, protectionism, and nativism. We have to defeat those who would worsen our divisions. We have to remind our sons and daughters that we became the most powerful nation on earth by tearing down walls, not building them.